where activists have received extremely long sentences. The case of Eric McDavid, a young man who was basically entrapped by an 18-year-old woman who was paid by the FBI to infiltrate him and his friends. They were prosecuted for thought crimes. There were no accusations that they burned anything down or caused any damage to anything. But as a result of a conspiracy conviction, a judge imposed 22 years on that young man. His case is currently on appeal. And unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen several similar cases where the courts have imposed 2 decades or more on radical environmental activists as a result of engaging in economic sabotage. And the courts have been using new tools that were created via the Patriot Act. They've also started using old laws in very different ways, things such as terrorist enhancements, which allow for excessive punishment, very harsh incarceration once the people are in prison. And as with the case of Daniel McGowan, we have now seen radical activists sent to literally terrorist facilities where their conditions are basically entirely in segregation. They have very little, even the normal rights that prisoners have are stripped away from people who are sent to these terrorist facilities.
This idea of green being the new red, do you subscribe to this, Lauren, Regan?
Definitely. I think that the Green Scare and the prosecutions that we've seen are our generation's equivalent of the Red Scare. We're seeing government rampages using grand juries in abusive ways. If the Bush administration did one thing correctly, it was to manipulate mainstream media and really use words in order to brand and malign people in ways that we hadn't seen in a long time, probably since the 50s. And, you know, it really is sort of a war of ideology in a lot of ways. If the government wants to brand you as a terrorist based on your beliefs or based on your ethical principles, there's really no way for you to defend yourself of that. And it definitely, you know, from the beginning of the Green Scare, the government has really taken this campaign to the media. On the first day that people were arrested almost 4 years ago, the then Attorney General Alberto Gonzales conducted a national press conference where he called these defendants who were innocent until proven guilty, but he labeled them as eco-terrorists on national media day one. And from that time, it's been really a challenge for us. I think most mainstream humans see a difference between flying a plane into a building or burning down a horse barn to stop wild Mustang slaughter. But the government, I think, in defense of the corporations that pay them lots of money and have lots of lobbyists, definitely see that as a significant threat to their profit-making abilities.
The setting of the fire of the light trucks in Eugene, Jeff, that happened right before September 11th. How did you feel being called a terrorist for what you had done, a domestic terrorist?
It happened about a year before September 11th, and it was new. It was going from being an activist or a tree hugger and a variety of other names that I've been called and are laughable to suddenly being public enemy #1. And it's really interesting to see that you can have a crime that if anyone else would do it is just that, it's a crime. But if you have some type of political thought behind it or some type of activist motivation, suddenly it's no longer a crime, it's an act of terrorism.
Why did you decide to do this interview, Jeff?
Well, that's a good question. I think that there's people out there that want to hear my story, And for years, the only interviews that I've done were more about defending my belief system and pointing out the scientific facts of climate change. And this is the first interview that I've actually given that's personal and about my experiences. And I think it's important for people to understand that there's several people incarcerated in the United States right now that are environmental activists that are being treated like terrorists. There are our own people engaged in acts of illegal civil disobedience, much like the Boston Tea Party. And historically, it's people like these that bring about positive social change, and we're throwing them away in prison for decades.
What advice would you have now, given the climate today and the level of environmental activism there is, for young environmentalists?
I think they need to choose their battles and struggles very carefully and look at what has happened to me and other individuals when they make decisions about things that they want to be involved in. And I think it's really important that we learn lessons from our past and learn ways in which we can be successful without putting ourselves at severe risk.
The Animal Liberation Front, Environmental Liberation Front are considered the #1 domestic terrorist groups in this country. Do you consider yourself a part of the ELF, Jeff?
No, I think it's important to remember that there's thousands of people that use direct action to try to create a better world. It's the heart and intentions of the warrior that are important and not the label.
Jeffrey Luers released from prison on December 16th after serving 9.5 years in jail. In June 2001, he was sentenced to 22 years and 8 months for burning 3 light trucks. We also were joined by his attorney, Regan, attorney for Jeffrey Luers and executive director of the Civil Liberties Defense Center. If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Asked him about the ELF. I meant to say the Earth Liberation Front. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We'll be back in a minute. Jamshid